Remembering the Boys, a special retrospective episode. The scale, the controversy, the characters, and the heart behind the chaos. In this special episode, I revisit the groundbreaking, controversial, and culturally seismic series, The Boys. Through archival conversations with creator Eric Kripke, cast members Giancarlo Esposito, Antony Starr, Aya Cash, Karl Urban, Laz Alonso, Jack Quaid, and Erin Moriarty, this episode explores how the show pushed boundaries and redefined the superhero genre and carved out a legacy that still sparks debate. Starting us off is Eric Kripke. The Boys, challenges? You bet.
It's a big show. And, we had to practically build a 50-foot long whale, for instance, which took months and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But really all the gags, we have some really big stunts and some really big moves this year that really require an incredible amount of pre-planning and so really all of it. And then introducing the new characters. Stormfront is primarily our big new character, and so there's just a lot of conversation about first of all you have to build the suit. I mean, so much of the show, it's funny of how much of this show actually just kind of comes from the suit, like our production schedule when we cast, because they take 6 months to build. So you have to cast an actor, which means you have to know what role you're creating, have a sense of who that character is and what they're doing 6 months before you normally would, because you just have to put them in the wardrobe and then you start creating that character very early. So it starts there, and then you just sort of figure out Stormfront is a character from the books, but it's a man, and we made the character a female, and so it's just about how do you take the core elements of the character from the comics, but then adjust it to reflect what you want to say about the world we're living in.
There's more on Remembering the Boys in a moment. Giancarlo Esposito talks about his casting on The Boys.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of Eric Kripke as well, and became that fan. Heard all about Supernatural from my 4 daughters. Whenever they would come to visit, they'd be locked in the library binging Supernatural. And I, of course, don't know much about that show, but met him on Revolution and fell in love with him. His ideas, his energy, his clarity were really, to me, pushing the envelope always. And so I was up in Toronto, I was in the studio doing a piece called Jet. And I turned a corner and there was Eric Kripke with his whole crew, and who I had all met on Revolution. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm doing this show, it's called The Boys," and da 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 da. And oh, great. Sound like it's a superhero show. And I went, "Oh, wow, fantastic." And then he started scratching his head and he kind of looked at me and I said, "Eric, I think I know what you're thinking. I've seen that look before." And he said, "Well, would you?" First thing out of his mouth, "Would you?" I said, "Of course I would. Of course I would." Because I love you and the concept sounds great. So I didn't know too much about the show then. And then maybe a month later, my people came to me and said, "Hey, look, they called and blah, 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 all the regular stuff. They can't afford you, all the." I said, "Look, put all that in a drawer. I love this guy Kripke. I love what he does. Let's get the 411." And they told me what the character could be. And I was on board immediately because I felt like the essence of this show was something different. It was about superhumanity being human in many ways. It was about superheroes who, did things that humans did, abused each other, hurt each other, had to apologize, stole from each other, try to kill each other. And I thought, oh, okay, this is an extension of a lot of what I feel is reflective of what's going on in our society. And then I started to watch some of the show and I went, oh my God, there's Trump, there's this guy, you know what I mean? And I went, oh, wow. So to me, it's been an illuminating show. It's been incredible to work with Eric. You know, I came in just to do a few episodes, and then everything changed. You know, all of a sudden Madeline was going, and so Kripke came to me and said, hey, would you want to be, you know, I've got ideas. And I said, well, I got ideas too. And he started writing. And so, you know, I always, and he, look, it happens that way when you're inspired by a writer and they're inspired by you or a creator, that they give you a shot, you do a scene, and they see something, a different side of you they've never seen before. And then they go, oh my goodness, this could take us here. This could take us here. Are you willing to go there? And I say, sure. Because this show, season 2, I'll tell you right now, season 2 is going to blow your mind because it has all of these very, and I'm sure you've seen 3, but it has all these very human elements about people who have sometimes not very good intentions, yet their gig, their job, their acting day job is to put on the cape and save lives, which is a wonderful thing to be shown about our world, because everything is a show now. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter what I say. You could twist what I say, and words are being, you know, misconstrued, and all these things are happening all in our show to the genius of Eric Kripke, which shows intention and morality and politics, money, science. It's all there in a wonderful way on this show, and I really respect Eric for creating it.
Here are Antony Starr, Aya Cash, and Karl Urban.
That's one of the great things about this show. You know, we live in a world that's saturated by graphic novel content, dominated by Marvel and DC. You know, there's a lot of it out there, but they tend to take on the safer elements of, and more morally mainstream and ethically mainstream ideas of good versus evil. There's not a huge amount past that, I dare to say. Whereas this show, because of its slightly grubbier nature, it can really dip into some social issues that would be untouchable for those other comic book franchises, and that's great. But as I've said since day one, you know, it's a bit of a show for all comers, because as much as, I mean, you can turn up and get those deeper meanings and really look into the underlying thematic issues, thematic themes going on, or you can just turn up and have a hell of a lot of fun, because the show is ultimately set up in a universe, in a world of comics and superheroes. So it's larger than life. It's not real, and it allows a good amount of escapism and fun. And I think that's, to me, the most important thing, aside from you know, trying to change the world through art, is that it allows people to turn up and shut their day-to-day off and just spend an hour of fun.
It's fun to play, but it's also hard. I mean, there are moments where stuff comes up that you're like, is this, you know, as an actor, you are there to sort of translate the work, right, of the writer, that like you're speaking things that maybe somebody else has put together, so they're telling a story and you're trying to bring humanity to it or whatever. And sometimes you have input about lines or plot stuff, but often you don't. And sometimes you come up against something and you're like, is this the right way to do it? Is this how I, you know, and that's why you have to work with people that you trust and think are really smart and talented. And when I agreed to take this job, and let's be clear, I auditioned, so I also went after this job. But it was, I spoke with Eric first about the complications of this world and their sort of real life reverberations and reflections and how it was going to be handled. And I had a lot of trust in him and thought he was I thought he was smarter than me. And I was like, great, okay, so we can work together.
In fairness, he's smarter than most people, so, you know.
Exactly. It doesn't take much with me. But
I was going to say, that never entered my head, because I just assume everyone's smarter than me.
So it's good. It's both. It's both like thrilling, and also it's scary, because when you're dealing with things that are very topical and emotional for people, you want to do the right thing.
while our show is set in this sort of heightened reality, a world where we imagine that superheroes exist and that they would be realistically imbued with faults and flaws akin to many celebrities in our modern day society, this also gives us the opportunity to explore certain elements of our culture that are a little bit sort of raw and topical. And you're right, like in the first season, there was definite parallels with the Me Too movement, with sexual harassment. And season 2 happens to touch on things like corporate corruption, corporate greed, xenophobia, racism, and all of those are particularly current and topical today. And I don't know how Kripke does it, because he wrote this script like over a year ago, and it's almost like the world has those issues that we happen to be exploring in season 2 have really come to the forefront of modern society.
Here's Mother's Milk backstory, a little bit of it, with Laz Alonso.
We haven't gone into Mother's Milk's backstory yet in season 1 or 2, but there's a little snippet in an episode that you all haven't seen yet where Mother's Milk reveals a very personal part of his motivation, why he's even part of the boys. And you would think that you were listening to some of the activists who have been marching in the streets this year. As Karl said, it's amazing how dialed in Kripke and the writers were last year. It was almost like a crystal ball. No one would think that we shot the scenes that you're going to see for the rest of the season a year ago, because they're so timely with what we've been seeing in the last few months.
More on Remembering the Boys, so stay tuned. Jack Quaid and Erin Moriarty on Huey and Starfire working together despite their rough relationship.
These two characters are working together on a mission together. There was so much left unsaid in the first season, but now all cards are on the table and they have to put their feelings for each other, positive or negative, aside for now and get the job done. But that doesn't mean that the feelings aren't still there. So that was a really, that was such an interesting thing to play around with.
Yeah, I think, I think that underlying all of the hurt and the, the violation of trust that has occurred between these two characters is you can't take away, you can't subtract those bonding and connective moments in season 1. And I think there's a reason why Annie can't shake them and has residual feelings. And there's a reason why they did fall for each other, is that even though Huey was lying, those moments between them were very real. So when you come into season 2 and then, Annie, Starlight is put in this position by Homelander, it's just, again, it's one of those moments, sort of not dissimilar to season 1 in the boardroom with the Deep, where she is, she's on a mission. And in her mind, the most important thing is to attain that mission, to be a hero and to make the world a better place. And so in season 1, she just kind of acts incorrectly, how most people would deem it, but she's just trying to stay on track. Season 2 with Huey, and she is she's so torn in terms of whether to obey Homelander and maintain her facade so that she can stick to this mission, or hurt, potentially kill this guy who she really does love. And I think ultimately, I would like to say for both of them, they're never going to be able to, I don't think they'd ever be able to physically hurt each other. I think there's been too much of a bonding that is unshakable, but they're also two people who have a very strong sense of mission. So when they're put in situations where they're stuck in those two hard places, it's an exceptionally difficult situation to navigate.
Yeah, I think with that moment with Homelander kind of forcing your hand, like there's a little bit of acceptance from Huey of like, if that's what she needs to do to stay safe, like that's what she's got to do.
Right.
Yeah, that was especially that moment was so interesting on the day.
Yeah.
Besides all the blood and guts just artfully decorated on everybody's faces.
This episode isn't just looking back with nostalgia. It's a look on how the boys reshaped genre storytelling, using humor, horror, and razor-sharp commentary that at times was spot on to world events. The series forced audiences to confront power, corruption, and humanity's darkest impulses. These conversations capture the creators' cast at their most honest, reflective, and unfiltered. On Sci-Fi Talk Plus, some exclusive episodes have a video version as well. All episodes will feature a podcast and also bonus video, great for listening and watching on your phone, tablet, or desktop. And besides that, it'll feature the best episodes selected by listener downloads. You can save 17% on a yearly plan to get those commercial-free episodes published Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, with special episodes as well. Click on the link in the show notes today. Thanks so much for listening. This is Tony Tellado.